Will you please pray with me? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be worthy in your sight, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Today is the last day of this October sermon series, What Scares Us. I know, many of you are sobbing in your seats of disappointment. But today we are not talking about monsters like we have for the past few weeks. We will be discussing Halloween itself. You see, Christians for a very long time have had a weird relationship with Halloween. Some Christians absolutely hate the holiday. Some just put up with it. But most Christians I've met are never just flat out jolly about it like we are with Christmas or with Easter. I am curious why. When I was a boy, I was always into Halloween. I loved the idea of dressing up and being someone else for a day, and there's free candy, But then I met a girl whose parents never let her do a single thing on Halloween. And she was perfectly fine with that, believe it or not. You see, she had been told that Halloween was Satan's birthday, and people who celebrated Halloween were being deceived by the devil himself. And it's not hard to see where she's coming from. Halloween has its origins in the Gaelic Harvest Festival, which I am going to butcher completely, Samhain, where giant bonfires were lit, and it was believed that during this time, the boundary between the spirits and earth was thinner than normal, and dressing up in costumes was used as a way to disguise oneself from the trickster fairies that would appear on those days. So to some Christians, this pagan root is all they need to know. It's pagan and therefore must be evil, regardless of the fact that both Easter and Christmas both have pagan roots that we turned Christian. Who cares about that? The fact that Halloween is also associated with pranks and vandalism, divination games, horror movies, haunted houses, or worst of all, sugary sweets, just makes it a little bit easier to hate. However, I have something to tell you to relieve your fears. Halloween is, in fact, a Christian holiday. Thank you. We don't call the holiday Samhain because the holiday is not about pagan rituals. Halloween, or actually the day after, is a major Christian holiday called All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day. Halloween is then short for All Hallows' Eve. All Saints' Day is meant to be a celebration of all the saints, both known and unknown, both living and dead. So, cram all the saints into one day. St. Paul, St. John, St. Peter, St. George, St. Joan of Arc, St. John the Baptist, St. Mary, St. Martha, St. Augustine, Mary, Mother of Jesus, and St. Joseph, plus all the saints the church celebrates, and all the saints we don't even know are saints, and that makes for a pretty holy day. The preparation for the next day then changes Halloween's traditions to be more Christian. Since the Middle Ages, Christians have been making soul cakes for all the baptized souls and handing them out in exchange for prayers, which started our tradition of trick-or-treating. Bonfires were lit in medieval times to guide deceased family members back to their families or from purgatory to heaven, while also scaring away demons. Costumes were worn to hide oneself from evil spirits, but also to dress up as saints and act out biblical stories. Skulls, which are commonly used as decorations, were not just there to be scary, but because Jesus was crucified on Golgotha, the place of the skull. All this would lead up to a night full of prayer for those in the community that had died recently, commemorating them before the feast of All Saints. Slowly, society has taken these Christian traditions and made them more secular. Hence why we can dress up as superheroes now instead of just saints, or why we give out candy instead of soul cakes. But the idea that Halloween is a night of depravity and evil before a holy feast is something made up, or a rather recent creation inspired by horror books or movies and a misunderstanding of the roots of Halloween. But remember, in God there is only light and no darkness. Just because a day is marred by other traditions doesn't mean that Halloween stops being a holy day. So interestingly enough, Halloween suffers from the same fate as Easter and Christmas. Originally a holy day, but transformed into something else in an attempt at creativity, fun, and inclusivity. But unlike Christmas and Easter, I think Halloween has a different benefit to the church than Christmas or Easter can. For years, people have been claiming that there is a war on Christmas and Easter, trying to secularize the holidays and take the spirituality completely out of them. Hence the phrase, keep Christ in Christmas. Halloween doesn't suffer from this problem on a more basic level. There will always be some sort of spirituality inherent in Halloween, and therefore a lingering sense of spirituality in society. Halloween will always be spiritual in nature because of the roots in which it springs from. Autumn is a time of life and death, both of which are inherently spiritual. Around us, it gets colder, and plants and trees visibly die. Harvest is brought in, leading to life, but also a reminder that until very recently, death. Before, you could just go to Felkman Foods to get food. Harvest had to last. If harvest wasn't good enough, it could literally mean death for your family and your community. You wouldn't survive the cold and the dark of the winter. This is why Halloween is also around the time of other cultures' harvest festivals. Every culture seems to realize that there's some connection between harvest, life, and death. We may have harvest down to a science now, although I'm sure some of you farmers out there would disagree with me. But when it seems that whether each year's crop is good or not was based on chance or divine intervention, it was easy to assume that God himself held your life in his hands. So no matter how many horror movies or scary things pop up, Halloween will always be a presence of spirituality in a secular society. People will always wonder about life and death. And so they will come to the religious to understand, and that will be your chance to tell them about the light that shines in even the darkest dark, and to remember those saints who walked this path before you. I don't get why Christians fear Halloween. Sure, it's been made out to be evil and scary. Death is associated with Halloween, and death is scary. But death is not the end for us. We take this time coming up to remember those who died in our community. We remember the saints that came before us. We remember that our God is the God of both the living and the dead. Jesus rose from the grave to be the ruler of both the living and the dead. That is why Halloween is worth being celebrated. Not because of the spookiness of the time or the beauty of the season. Those are all nice perks. But because we as Christians can look on this season of Halloween and laugh and remember, because our God has conquered death. Amen.